They called her just a nurse. Then they laughed at the faded mark on her wrist, never knowing that same mark had once been carried through smoke blood and a classified corridor where men stopped breathing and the official record learned how to lie. It happened on a rainy night in Norfolk, inside a dockside tavern filled with shipyard workers, off-duty sailors, spilled whiskey, and the kind of noise people use to bury old ghosts. Grace Callahan moved between tables like any ordinary waitress, but her eyes never stopped tracking doors, hands, exits, and danger. This is not just a story about disrespect. It is about what happens when a woman erased by the system is finally seen by someone who knows the truth. Watch closely because one sleeve changes everything. Like the video and comment where you're watching from. Before the retired Admiral lifted his sleeve before the room went quiet enough to hear rain slipping down the windows, Grace Callahan had already been measuring danger for almost 2 hours. She had learned to do it without turning her head. The Harbor Light Tavern sat 2 blocks from the Elizabeth River, wedged between a shuttered bait shop and a brick building that rented rooms by the week to men who did not unpack. On clear days you could smell diesel from the docks. On wet nights like this one, the whole street carried the damp metallic scent of harbor chains, storm drains, cold pavement, and old beer rising from the floorboards. The sign above the door buzzed in blue light. Half the letters worked. The other half flickered when the wind came off the water. Inside the tavern was warm, crowded, and too loud to be peaceful. Shipyard workers filled the back tables with muddy boots and tired shoulders. 2 civilian contractors in pressed jackets argued over invoices near the dartboard. Off-duty sailors leaned into booths, laughing too hard at stories they had already told each other 3 times. A jukebox in the corner played an old country song under the noise fighting a losing war against glass voices and the deep kitchen hiss of oil. Grace moved through all of it with a tray balanced on her left hand. She did not hurry. That was one of the first things Ray Boone had noticed about her when she came in 9 months earlier, asking if he needed help on weeknights. People who had waited tables before moved fast because they were trying to beat the room. Grace moved like she had already accepted the room and calculated the shortest safe route through it. She never bumped a chair. She never reached across a table without knowing where every hand was. She never let a customer get behind her unless she had chosen to let him. At first, Ray thought she had restaurant experience. Then he saw the way she treated a broken glass. A college kid had dropped a pint near the bar. The glass had shattered under a woman's sandal and opened a clean red line across the side of her foot. Half the room had looked down. Grace had already moved. She was on one knee with a towel in her hand before the woman realized she was bleeding. No panic. No wasted motion. Pressure first. Elevation second, voice low enough to cut through shock without feeding it. "Look at me," Grace had said. "Not the floor. The floor is dramatic. You are not." The woman had laughed through tears. Ray had stood behind the bar with a bottle of rye in his hand and watched Grace wrap the foot with a dish towel folded so cleanly it looked like something taut, not improvised. Later, when the woman's boyfriend drove her to urgent care, Ray asked Grace where she had learned that. She had wiped blood off her knuckles at the sink. Medical, she said. That was all. Ray had been running the Harbor Light long enough to know when a person gave a complete answer that happened to be very small. He did not ask the next question. In Norfolk, people came through with sealed parts of themselves. Sailors, contractors, widowers. Women with names they wore like borrowed coats, if they worked hard and did not steal from him. Ray let their locked rooms stay locked. Grace worked hard. She showed up early, stayed late, cleaned without being asked, and remembered orders the way some men remembered baseball statistics. She knew who drank bourbon because they liked it and who drank it because they were trying to keep from calling someone. She knew which sailors were loud but harmless, which contractors tipped big to prove they could, and which lonely men needed the check before they mistook service for invitation. Ray trusted her with the floor on Fridays. That was not a small thing. Friday nights near the naval docks had their own weather. The clouds outside did not matter much. The real storm came in waves of payday money, command stress, cheap bravery, and men who had spent all week being told what to do and wanted 2 hours of pretending no one could tell them anything. Ray kept the lights dim enough to flatter tired faces and bright enough to show trouble forming. He poured heavy on the first drink, fair on the second, and carefully after that. He knew the exact note in a man's voice when confidence turned toward violence. Grace knew it too. That was why Ray watched her. Not because he doubted her, because she saw things before he did. At 6:40, the first dinner rush folded into the after-work crowd. A couple at booth 3 leaned across the table with that soft, nervous look of people on a second date pretending it was casual. Grace gave them space. A group of welders took the high table near the window and ordered wings by the basket. She brought extra napkins before they asked. 2 women in navy blue office badges sat at the bar and drank gin, slowly speaking in careful voices about a supervisor neither of them liked. Grace heard pieces of every conversation and carried none of them on her face. Her dark hair was tied back at the base of her neck. Her shirt sleeves were rolled once, then twice, because the room was too warm. She had a thin scar along her right thumb, pale against the skin, and a faded mark near her left wrist that usually stayed hidden unless she reached too far. A thin black circle, a short vertical line, small enough to miss, old enough to look unimportant. She had covered it the first few months with a watch. Then the watch broke during a double shift when a drunk tried to grab a bottle from behind the bar and Grace caught his wrist before Ray could get around the counter. After that, she stopped wearing one. She did not explain the mark. Most people did not ask. Most people knew when not to. The 4 men who came in at 7:12 did not. They entered together bringing rainwater, cold air, and the kind of energy that made 3 tables look over before the door had shut. They were young, late 20s, maybe early 30s at most. Short hair, thick necks, civilian clothes that still managed to announce a unit culture. 2 wore faded shirts from Little Creek. 1 had sleeves cut off despite the weather. All 4 carried themselves like men used to being assessed and eager to pass every time. Grace saw them before Ray did. She was at booth 3 setting down a plate of crab cakes when the door opened. Her eyes went to the glass reflection behind the booth, then to the men themselves. Hands empty, shoulders loose, alcohol not yet active. Group leader in front. Second man watching exits. Third already smiling at the room. Fourth following the loudest body. She placed the plate in front of the woman at booth 3 and smiled just enough. "Careful," Grace said. "The plate is hotter than his last text." The woman laughed. The man across from her blushed. Grace turned with the empty tray and crossed toward the bar. Ray was already looking at the new arrivals. "Little Creek," he muttered. Grace set the tray down. "Looks like it." "Trouble." "Not yet." Ray glanced at her. "You say that like weather." "It is." The 4 men took a center table, not the largest one, but the one with the clearest view of the bar and both doors. That told Grace something. Not bad by itself. Just information. The leader dropped into the chair facing the room. Grace learned his name later. Tyler Knox. For now, she knew him by posture. He leaned back as if the chair owed him loyalty. Broad shoulders, square jaw, smile too ready. He wore confidence like armor that still had factory shine. Men like that were not always cruel. Sometimes they were just loud because no one had yet taught them the cost of volume. His friends settled around him. Drew Maddox took the chair nearest the wall. Quiet eyes, less drunk on himself. Cal Tate faced the bar and grinned at everything. Jared Pike sat last and laughed before anything was funny. Grace gave them 90 seconds before approaching. Never rush a table that wants to be seen. Let them arrange the performance first. When she stepped up, Tyler was halfway through a story that involved a training pool, a broken mask, and someone vomiting in front of an instructor. His hands moved as he talked. Cal laughed with his whole body. Jared slapped the table. Drew smiled but watched Grace when she arrived. "What can I get you?" Grace asked. Tyler looked up. For half a second he performed charm. 4 doubles. Whatever bourbon doesn't taste like a hospital floor. Grace looked at him. "You spend a lot of time licking hospital floors." Cal burst out laughing. Drew hid a smile in his glass of water. Jared pointed at Tyler like he had just watched him take a clean hit. Tyler's smile tightened, then recovered. "Fair. 4 doubles. Your call." "Ray's call," Grace said. "My call would be water and humility." This time Drew laughed out loud. Tyler leaned back, studying her like he was deciding whether to enjoy being challenged. "What's your name, Grace?" "Grace," he repeated, trying it like a handle. "All right, Grace. 4 doubles." She nodded once and turned away. Behind the bar, Ray had already pulled the bottle. "You made friends," he said. "Temporary ones." Ray poured. "They look expensive. They look thirsty." "Same thing in here." Grace delivered the drinks without incident. She set each glass down cleanly. Tyler watched her hands, not in a way she liked, but not yet in a way that required correction. When she reached across to place Drew's drink, her left sleeve shifted. The mark showed. Tyler saw it. His eyes caught there and held. Grace felt the attention before she looked down. She pulled her arm back at the same speed she had used for every other movement. No flinch, no rush. The sleeve fell into place. Tyler smiled. "What's that?" Grace straightened. "What's what?" "The little symbol." He circled a finger in the air near his own wrist. "That a trauma nurse thing?" Grace picked up the empty water glass from the table. "No. A church thing? No. A secret boyfriend thing." Cal laughed because he thought he was supposed to. Grace looked at Tyler then. Her expression did not change much. That was part of what made it effective. You always ask women 3 questions before you say, "Thank you." Drew made a quiet sound into his drink. Tyler looked at him fast. Too fast. There it was. The small bruise under the ego. Grace saw it land. Tyler gave her a grin that had less humor in it. "Thank you, Grace. You're welcome." She left before he could make the table his again. At the service bar, Ray leaned close. "That table giving you trouble?" Grace loaded 2 beers onto her tray. "Not yet." "That your polite way of saying they might?" "That's my accurate way of saying they might." Ray watched Tyler laugh too loudly at something Jared had said. "I can cut them off early." "No." Ray frowned. "No. If you cut them off now, they become the heroes of a story they tell themselves for 6 months. And if I don't," Grace lifted the tray, "they might stay small." Ray did not like it, but he understood enough to let her work. The night thickened. By 7:30, the windows had gone black except for the tavern's own reflection. Rain streaked the glass in crooked lines. The room smelled of fried fish, wet wool, beer, and old wood warming under too many bodies. The jukebox switched to a slower song, something about leaving Texas, but no one listened closely enough for it to matter. Grace moved table to table. She brought more water to the seals without asking. Tyler noticed and lifted his glass. "Look at that. She does care." Grace kept walking. "About Ray's liquor license?" Cal laughed again. Drew did not. Tyler drank. Too fast. Grace adjusted her assessment. Alcohol active, pride active, group reinforcement active, still manageable. At booth 3, the nervous couple had found their rhythm. The man had stopped checking his phone. The woman had leaned back and laughed without covering her mouth. Grace saw that and delayed the check. Let ease breathe when it finally arrived. At the high table, one of the welders began coughing hard on a piece of wing. His friends laughed for 1 second too long before realizing the sound was wrong. Grace was there before the chair scraped back. She set her tray on the nearest table. "Stand up," she said. The man tried to wave her off, face reddening. Grace's voice sharpened, not loud, but edged. "Stand up now." He stood. She moved behind him, found the line under his ribs, and drove upward once, twice. The piece of food shot out onto the floor. The man bent over, dragging air back into himself. His friends went silent. Grace stepped around, looked him in the face, and held up 2 fingers. "How many?" He coughed. 2. "Good. Sit." Small sips. No heroic chewing for 5 minutes. The table broke into relieved laughter. One of his friends slapped him on the back too hard. Grace caught the friend's wrist. "Do not hit the man I just restarted." The friend raised both hands. "Yes, ma'am." Grace retrieved her tray and continued toward the bar. Tyler had seen the whole thing. For the first time that night, he was not smiling. Drew said something to him. Tyler shrugged it off and drank again. Grace noticed. So did Ray. "You all right?" Ray asked when she returned. "Fine. You say that too often." "I am fine too often." Ray snorted. "You ever work emergency rooms?" Grace placed dirty glasses in the rack. "Something like that. Something like that covers a lot with you." Grace looked toward the seal table. "Yes." Ray let the silence settle. He had spent years learning that pressure did not open certain doors. It only made the hinges disappear. The front door opened again and again. Each time Grace knew before the bell finished shaking. She did not stare. She did not make a show of caution. Her eyes simply moved where they needed to move. A man in a soaked gray coat. A woman with a guitar case. 2 sailors arguing over a ride share. A retired chief who came every Friday and always ordered 1 beer no matter how long he stayed. Faces entered. Grace filed them. The room shifted. She adjusted. At 7:42, Tyler called out. "Hey, Grace?" She was passing with a tray of empty plates. She stopped at the edge of the table. "Yes." He pointed at her wrist. "Come on." "You never answered." Drew looked down. Cal grinned uncertainly. Jared leaned forward, interested because Tyler was interested. Grace did not move closer. "I did answer." "You said no 3 times. That's not an answer. It is when the question is none of your business." Tyler's eyebrows rose. He looked around at his friends, inviting them into the moment. Cal gave the laugh he was expected to give. Jared joined him. Drew stayed quiet. "Relax," Tyler said. "We're just asking about a tattoo." Grace looked at the 4 glasses on the table. 2 nearly empty, 2 half full. She looked at Tyler's right hand resting near the glass, but not on it. She looked at his shoulders, loose but warming. Then asked something else. Tyler leaned back. "What did you do before this?" Grace held his gaze. "Worked nights, doing what keeping people alive long enough to become someone else's problem." That quieted them for a beat. Drew looked up. Tyler blinked, then smiled as if he had decided she was joking. "Hospital nurse." Grace picked up an empty glass. "Sometimes." Military Grace set the glass on her tray. "Can I get you anything else?" Tyler laughed softly. "There it is." Grace did not ask what he meant. He supplied it anyway. That look. The mysterious thing. "You know how many people come through places like this acting like they were attached to something classified?" Drew said, Tyler ignored him. "They get 1 tattoo, learn 3 acronyms, and suddenly everybody's supposed to treat them like they fast roped into hell." Grace looked at Drew, then Cal, then Jared, then back to Tyler. Her voice stayed even. "I brought your drinks. I did not ask you for respect." Tyler's smile thinned. "No, you just act like we owe it." Grace leaned in slightly. Not enough to threaten, enough to make the table feel the distance change. "If you owed it, I would have collected." The words landed softly, too softly for the nearest tables to catch. Tyler stared at her. For 1 second, something real passed behind his eyes, not fear. Recognition of a wall he had not expected to find. Grace straightened. Last round of doubles. After that, water. She left. At the bar, Ray had stopped polishing a glass. I heard tone, he said. You heard correctly. Want them gone? Grace looked back at the table. Tyler was talking again, but lower now. Drew listened with his jaw set. Cal looked unsure. Jared looked bored because the fun had thinned. Not yet. Ray exhaled through his nose. One of these nights I'm going to ban those 2 words. Then I'll find new ones. I bet you will. Grace allowed herself the smallest smile. It disappeared before she turned away. The cut on the woman's foot from weeks ago had not been the only time Grace's old life surfaced through the new one. There had been a man in the parking lot in January who slipped on ice and cracked the back of his head against a bumper. Grace had knelt in slush without noticing the cold, checked his pupils, stabilized his neck, and kept his wife from shaking him awake. There had been a fight in March that ended before it started because Grace put herself beside the angriest man instead of in front of him and said his daughter's name. She had heard it 10 minutes earlier when he answered a call. He had turned at the sound of it like someone waking from a bad dream. There had been a night in May when a young sailor sat in the last booth with both hands wrapped around a beer he never drank. Grace watched him for 20 minutes, then brought him coffee and a plate of fries. He said, I didn't order this. Grace said no. He looked at her, then eyes wet and furious. She sat across from him for exactly 4 minutes. Ray saw it. He never heard what she said. Whatever it was, the sailor left alive. Ray stopped asking himself what kind of medical work taught a woman to see death coming from that many directions. He was grateful she saw it. At 7:58, the tavern had settled into its Friday night body. Noise layered over noise. Rain tapped the windows. The kitchen bell rang. Someone cursed at the dartboard. Booth 3 ordered dessert they had both claimed they did not want. The welders sent Grace a thumbs up and a napkin with a badly drawn medal on it for saving their friend from a chicken wing. Grace pinned it beside the register because it made Ray laugh. The seal table had quieted but not softened. Tyler was drinking water now because Grace had placed it there, and Ray had backed her without a word. That irritated Tyler more than being cut off would have. Water made him feel managed. Being managed made him feel small. Feeling small made him search for something to push. Grace knew the sequence. She also knew he had not yet decided where to put it. She carried a tray of fresh drinks to the 2 women at the bar, then turned toward the service station. Her sleeve caught slightly on the edge of a crate stacked near the wall and pulled back just enough for the mark to show again. Tyler saw it. So did Drew. Drew looked away first. Tyler did not. Lantern, Tyler said suddenly. Grace stopped. Not because he had guessed correctly. He had not. Because of the shape of the word in his mouth. Careless. Testing. What Cal asked. Tyler pointed with his chin. Her tattoo looks like a busted lantern. Grace turned slowly. The room did not quiet. Not yet. The insult was still small enough to live inside one table. Tyler raised both hands in fake innocence. What am I wrong? Grace walked back to the table. She set her tray on the empty chair beside Drew. That got his attention. You need your check. Tyler smiled. Maybe I need the story. Grace looked at him for a long moment. The old part of her, the part she kept folded under ordinary work and rent payments and Ray's bad jokes, made a clean assessment. He was drunk enough to be foolish. Not drunk enough to be unreachable. He was embarrassed. Not dangerous yet. His friends were no longer feeding him with the same enthusiasm. The situation could still be kept small. Grace picked up the tray. No, she said. You don't. She returned to the bar. Ray met her eyes. This time he did not ask. Grace washed her hands longer than necessary. Warm water ran over her fingers. The tavern moved behind her in reflected fragments on the small mirror above the sink. Tyler at the table, Drew watching him, Ray watching everyone. The front windows black with rain. Her wrist mark sat exposed for one breath before she pulled the sleeve down again. She had not thought of the corridor in weeks. Not clearly. That was not the same as not remembering. She remembered all the time in pieces her body carried without asking permission. The weight of a casualty strap across her palm. The copper taste of air filtered through dust. The strange silence after a blast when the ears stopped sending honest information. The feel of counting morphine with one hand while the other hand searched for a pulse. But she had not let the whole memory assemble. Not tonight. Not for a table of young men who thought pain had to announce itself to be real. Grace. Ray's voice brought her back. She turned off the water. What? He nodded toward the front. Door. The bell had not rung yet. Grace had already started turning. Through the rain-streaked glass, a man stood outside the tavern entrance. Late 60s, broad through the shoulders, civilian coat cut too well to be casual, hair silver at the temples, stillness without softness. He stood under the broken blue sign for one extra second, looking through the glass at the room as if the room had given him a question he did not like. Grace's eyes went to his hands. Empty. Then his posture. Military, though not trying to be. Then his face. Not familiar. Not safe, either. The door opened. Cold air moved through the tavern. The man stepped inside and paused just past the threshold. He scanned the room once, not like a tourist, not like a drunk looking for friends, but like someone whose body had never stopped understanding entry points. Grace knew that scan. She had lived inside that language. His gaze crossed the bar past Ray, past the tables, touched the seals, and found Grace. For a fraction of a second, nothing happened. Then Grace reached for an empty glass on the counter. Her sleeve shifted. The faded lantern mark showed beneath the warm bar light. The man stopped breathing. Not literally. Close enough. Grace saw his eyes lock on her wrist. The sound of the tavern pressed around her, but something inside the room narrowed into a single line between them. Tyler Knox noticed the stare and turned in his chair. A grin came back to his face, slower this time, meaner because he had found an audience. "Hey, Grace," he called. "Looks like someone finally recognizes your little nurse tattoo." Grace did not look at Tyler. The man at the door did not either. For one cold second, Grace Callahan stood behind the bar with a wet glass in her hand, her sleeve fallen back and a stranger looking at her like he had just seen a ghost walk out of a classified grave. Then he started toward her. The stranger moved through the Harbor Light Tavern without asking anyone to clear a path. Yet people shifted all the same. A chair tucked inward. A shoulder turned. A sailor at the bar lowered his glass before he knew why. The rain followed him in tiny silver drops along the shoulders of his coat, catching the neon light as he crossed the floor. Grace Callahan did not move. She stood behind the bar with one hand around a wet glass, her left sleeve fallen back just enough to reveal the faded mark near her wrist. The thin black circle. The small vertical line. The shape that looked harmless to everyone who had never seen it drawn in blood on a concrete wall or etched into the back of a metal case carried out under fire. The man stopped 3 feet from the bar. Up close, he was older than she had first thought, but not softened by it. His face had the weathered stillness of someone who had spent too many years giving orders that did not leave room for emotion. His eyes moved once from her wrist to her face. That was when Grace knew. He had not guessed. He had recognized. Tyler Knox twisted in his chair, still wearing the careless grin of a man trying to pull the room back under his control. "Hey, Grace," he called again. "You going to explain the mystery tattoo to your new friend, or is that classified too?" A few nervous laughs rose and died quickly. The old man did not look at Tyler. His voice came low. "Where did you get that mark? Grace set the glass down carefully. Not because she needed care, because if she did not choose each movement, something else inside her would choose for her. "It is personal," she said. The man's eyes did not leave hers. "Personal is not the word I would use." Ray Boone had moved closer behind the bar. He held a towel in one hand, forgotten now. His eyes went from Grace to the stranger, then to Tyler's table. Sir Ray said, keeping his voice even, "You want to order something?" The man still watched Grace. "In a minute." Tyler laughed under his breath louder than he needed to. "Oh, come on, it's a tattoo. Everybody's acting like she's got launch codes on her arm." The stranger turned then. Only his head. That was enough. Tyler's grin held for 1 second, then weakened at the edges. Grace saw his body realize before his pride did that the man looking at him was not another barroom old-timer with a story and a limp. This was a man who had spent decades inside rooms where rank was not decoration. It was gravity. The stranger spoke quietly. "Son, stop talking." Tyler's jaw shifted. "I was just saying. I heard you." There was nothing loud in it, nothing theatrical, no threat dressed up in volume. That made it worse. The table went still. Drew Maddox looked down at his water. Cal Tate rubbed the back of his neck. Jared Pike stared at the wet rings on the table as if they had become interesting. Tyler looked around and found no one helping him. Grace breathed in once, slow and controlled. "Sir," she said, and the word came out before she could decide if she meant it as respect or warning. The man turned back to her. "Thomas Calder," he said. "Rear Admiral retired." Ray's eyebrows lifted. Grace did not react. Names mattered. Rank mattered. But the mark mattered more. Calder lowered his eyes to her wrist again. His hand moved to his own sleeve. Grace felt her stomach tighten. "Do not," she said quietly. Calder paused. Only for a beat. Then he continued. He unbuttoned his cuff with slow fingers and rolled the fabric back over his wrist, then up his forearm. The tavern did not go silent all at once. Silence spread. It began with Ray, then the sailors nearest the bar, then the 2 women with the gin, then the welders at the high table, one of whom still had a napkin medal pinned to his shirt as a joke from earlier. Conversations thinned, then broke apart. Under the warm bar light on the inside of Calder's forearm was the same mark. A thin black circle, a short vertical line, older than hers, faded deeper. Not decorative, not chosen from a wall in a shop. Grace's fingers closed around the edge of the bar. For 1 second she was not in Norfolk. She was in a corridor with broken lights. A voice was screaming for a pressure bandage. Someone was saying the primary route was clear when it was not clear, when it was already groaning in a way concrete should never groan. Then the tavern returned. Glass, rain, whiskey, Ray breathing beside her. Tyler stood up. It was the worst thing he could have done. Not because he meant violence. Grace could see he did not. His hands were open. His eyes were confused. His pride, however, was injured, and injured pride in a young, trained man could wander into danger without knowing the road. "What is this?" Tyler said. Some old unit thing. Calder lowered his sleeve only halfway, leaving the mark visible. "Sit down." Tyler swallowed. "I'm asking a question, and I am giving you the safest possible answer." Tyler looked at Grace, then at Calder's arm, then at Grace again. "You 2 know each other?" Calder's face did not change. No. That answer did something to the room. Ray looked sharply at Grace. Grace kept her eyes on Calder. Calder's voice softened, but only by a degree. "Spring of 2019, he said. "Where were you?" Grace's mouth went dry. The words entered her like cold water. Spring of 2019. Not a year, not a season. A sealed room. A file number. a place that had been erased from every record she was allowed to speak about. She looked at the people watching. Too many faces, too much civilian air, too much of her life stacked around her in dirty glasses and unpaid tabs. "You should order a drink," she said. Calder studied her. Grace. The use of her first name landed like a hand around her throat. Ray turned toward her. Grace did not look at him. "You should order a drink," she repeated. "We can talk when I take my break." Calder held her gaze for another moment, then nodded once. "Bourbon. Neat." Ray moved automatically, grateful for a task. He poured from the middle shelf, then thought better of it, and reached for the better bottle without being asked. Calder sat at the bar. Tyler remained standing. Grace turned her eyes to him. "Sit down, Knox." She had not used his first name. She had heard one of the others say it earlier, but she had not used it until now. Tyler noticed. So did Drew. Tyler sat. The legs of the chair scraped against the floor too loud in the quiet. Grace picked up a tray and walked out from behind the bar. She needed motion. She needed the room to remember itself. Tables still had food cooling on them. Drinks still needed refilling. The night did not stop simply because the dead had found a way to breathe through an old man's sleeve. She approached Tyler's table without the customer's smile. The four men looked up. Only Drew met her eyes. Grace placed the check between the glasses. "I want to be clear," she said. Tyler stared at the check. "What happened earlier does not become bigger because you did not understand it. Ignorance is common. Performance is a choice." Tyler's face colored. "I said I did not know?" "You did not say that. You made noise until someone with more weight than you entered the room." Cal looked down. Jared said nothing. Drew took a slow breath. Grace's voice stayed low, meant only for the table. "You are young enough to think every closed door is hiding something you are owed. It is not. Some doors stay closed because what is behind them cost people more than curiosity is worth." Tyler looked at her wrist, this time not mocking. "What are you?" Grace held his gaze. Tired. She turned away before he could answer. At the bar, Calder sat with his bourbon untouched. Ray stood across from him, arms folded. "You know the shape of what she survived?" Ray said. Calder looked at him. Grace had heard Ray ask questions in 6 different tones. This one was careful, but it had steel under it. Calder picked up the glass. "I know enough to regret not knowing more sooner. That's supposed to comfort me." "No." Ray nodded slowly. "At least it's honest." Grace passed behind the bar and grabbed 2 plates for booth 3. Her hands were steady. That irritated her. Sometimes the body became calm in the wrong moments, as if it had mistaken shock for duty. She delivered the plates, checked on the welders, brought water to the gin women, and took a beer order from the retired chief near the dartboard. She did it all with the envelope of silence growing heavier between her and the Admiral at the bar. At 8:20, Ray caught her wrist gently as she reached for the coffee pot. Not the marked wrist, the other one. "You are taking your break," he said. "I have 3 tables. I have worked 3 tables before. That does not mean you should." "Grace." She looked at him then. Ray's face was rough with concern he did not know how to make polite. She nodded once. The back hallway behind the kitchen was narrow lit by one tired fluorescent tube that hummed like an insect trapped in glass. Coats hung from hooks along one wall. Cases of paper towels filled the other. The sounds of the tavern came through muted and thick as if the room were underwater. Grace leaned against the wall and pressed both palms flat to the cool plaster. She counted. Not breaths. Not exactly. The body could lie with breaths. She counted surfaces. Wall under hands. Concrete under boots. Air moving from the vent. Kitchen heat behind the door. Exit at her right. Storage shelf at her left. Real things. Present things. A knock came on the doorframe. Soft. announced. Grace opened her eyes. Calder stood at the entrance to the hallway, bourbon still in his hand. He had not followed too closely. He had stopped where she could see him fully. That told her more than his rank had. "May I?" he asked. Grace almost laughed. It would have sounded wrong. "You already did." He stepped inside. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Calder said the name. Operation Nightglass. Grace looked at the floor. The hallway seemed to shrink around it. That operation does not exist. It does now. She raised her eyes. Calder took the hit of her attention without looking away. The file was reopened 18 months ago. Internal review. Defense Intelligence Review Board. Medical extraction irregularities. Casualty routing. After action inconsistencies. Grace's face remained still. Inside, something old began turning over in the dark. Why? Because a retired analyst found a mismatch in the evacuation timeline. 4 minutes that should not have existed. Then a second mismatch. Then a medical tag with a location stamp that contradicted the official route. One loose thread turned into 19. Grace let the number settle. 19. Yeah, and you came here to tell me that in a bar hallway I came to Norfolk to meet someone else. I walked into that bar because it was raining and I wanted a drink. His eyes dropped briefly to her covered wrist. Then I saw the lantern mark. Grace said nothing. Calder's jaw tightened slightly. I have seen that mark 12 times in my life. 6 of those people are dead. 2 were classified beyond my reach for years. 1 disappeared so thoroughly I thought she had been buried under an alias inside the wrong system. Grace looked at him. I did not disappear. No, he said. You were misplaced by people who benefited from losing you. The sentence entered the hallway and stayed there. Grace turned her head toward the staff schedule pinned crookedly to the wall. Someone had written a joke under Ray's name in black marker. She stared at it without reading. Calder continued. Your old record listed you as attached medical support. Non-command. Secondary movement deviation. Contributing factor to extraction confusion. Grace's lips parted slightly, not in surprise. In recognition. Whitmore's words had survived 8 years. Calder saw it. The corrected record says something else. Grace looked back. His hand moved inside his coat. Slowly. He withdrew a sealed envelope, cream paper official weight, no markings on the outside except her name. Grace Callahan. The sight of it hurt more than she expected. What does it say? She asked. Calder held the envelope but did not force it toward her. It says the primary corridor was compromised before Whitmore claimed it was. It says you identified structural failure without radio confirmation. It says you moved 4 casualties through the service passage while maintaining airway support on 2 and hemorrhage control on 1. Grace's eyes went unfocused for half a breath. A service passage filled with dust. Evan Ross shouting that they had to move. A man named Lewis choking through a cracked mask. Her own voice saying, left side now, no waiting. Calder's voice remained steady. It says 4 confirmed survivors were alive because you made a decision the official report called a deviation. Grace's throat worked once. How many names are in that envelope? 5. She knew before he said it. 3 posthumous. Yes. The hallway hummed. Behind the kitchen door, someone laughed too loudly. A pan clanged. The living world kept making its careless sounds. Grace looked at the envelope. She did not reach for it. Why now, Calder's expression changed. Barely. Enough. Because the correction was filed 4 months ago. Because finding you took longer than it should have. Because I was part of the structure that failed to notice when your name disappeared from the version of events that helped a man build a career. Grace's eyes sharpened. What man Calder hesitated? Grace felt the hesitation and hated it. "Commander Blake Whitmore," he said. The name did not shock her. It clarified something she had stopped trying to clarify years ago. Whitmore at a folding command table. Clean sleeves, dry boots, voice clipped and annoyed because casualty movement had made his plan look fragile. Whitmore asking for the verbal sequence after extraction. Whitmore using the word unauthorized before the blood had dried on her hands. Grace looked down at her own palms. They were clean now. That had always seemed like the problem. Calder held out the envelope. "This belongs to you." Grace took it. The paper felt heavier than paper should. She did not open it. Calder watched her for a moment, then said, "There is someone else you should meet, Dr. Elaine Porter. She is the reason the review did not die in a filing cabinet." Grace slipped the envelope into the pocket of her apron. "Not tonight. She may not wait long." "I said not tonight." Calder nodded. "Understood." Grace looked toward the hallway door. "I have tables." It sounded absurd. It also sounded necessary. Calder stepped aside. As she passed him, he spoke again, softer. "Grace." She stopped, but did not turn. "For what it is worth, I read the reconstructed account 3 times. There is no version of it where you were a complication." Grace stood still. The words touched something tender and badly protected. Then she opened the door and stepped back into the heat and noise of the Harbor Light Tavern. The room glanced at her, then away. People had the decency or fear to pretend they had not been waiting. Ray stood behind the bar watching her with questions stacked behind his eyes. Tyler's table was quiet. Drew had both hands around his water. Cal stared at the floor. Jared checked his phone without reading it. Tyler looked smaller than he had an hour earlier, which did not make him harmless. Only unfinished. Grace picked up her tray. The envelope pressed against her hip beside her order pad and pen. For the rest of her break, she had imagined she would feel something clear. Anger, relief, grief, victory. Something with a clean edge. Instead, she felt the old corridor move under the floor of the tavern. She crossed to booth 3 and refilled 2 glasses. The woman on the date smiled. "Everything okay?" Grace looked at her for a second too long, then returned the smile in a smaller shape. "Yes," she said. "Just a long night." At the bar, Calder sat with his sleeve rolled down again. The mark was hidden. Grace's was hidden too. But the room had seen enough. Ray poured coffee into a mug and slid it toward her when she passed. She took 1 sip. Her hand did not shake. That almost made her angry. The front door opened again, letting in another gust of rain and river cold. Grace turned by instinct before the bell finished trembling, her eyes already moving from hands to face to posture. A woman stepped inside, carrying a dark leather bag, and the kind of silence that did not belong to customers looking for shelter. Grace saw her before the door closed, late 50s maybe. Gray threaded through dark hair pulled into a low knot. Civilian coat, practical shoes, no jewelry except a plain watch. She did not look like Navy in the obvious way. She wore no command posture, no officer's stiffness, no need to be recognized. But her eyes moved across the harbor light with a trained economy that made Grace's fingers tighten around the coffee mug. Door, bar, corners, hands, Calder, Grace. The woman found all of it in less than 3 seconds. Then she walked toward the bar. Calder turned on his stool before she reached him. He did not look surprised. Not exactly. He looked like a man who had expected a hard thing and was still unhappy to see it arrive. Ray noticed too. He came over with the bartender's version of a shield, a towel in one hand, expression neutral. "Evening," he said. "What can I get you?" The woman looked at Ray, then at Grace. "Coffee, if it's fresh." Ray glanced at the pot. "It's tavern coffee." "That answers the question." Grace almost smiled. Almost. Ray poured it anyway and set the mug down. The woman did not touch it. "Grace Callahan," she said. It was not a question. Grace placed her own mug on the counter. "That depends on who needs to know." The woman reached into her coat slowly and removed a card between two fingers. She set it face up on the bar. "Dr. Elaine Porter, Defense Intelligence Review Board." Grace did not pick up the card. The words sat there in black type, clean and official, surrounded by spilled beer rings and knife marks in the wood. Calder spoke quietly. "She is the analyst I mentioned." Grace kept her eyes on Porter. "You followed him?" Porter glanced at Calder. "I tracked his travel after he stopped answering my messages." Calder looked mildly offended. "I answered one. He sent a thumbs up. It conveyed status. It conveyed irritation." Ray looked from one to the other, and then at Grace, as if trying to decide whether this was the strangest thing he had ever seen in his bar. It was close, but not a clear winner. Grace picked up Porter's card. The paper was thick. Direct line. Government office. No unnecessary words. "You have 2 minutes," Grace said. Porter nodded once. "That is more than I expected." Grace stepped closer to the bar, keeping her voice low enough that the tables would only hear shape, not substance. "What do you want?" Porter looked at her with a precision that might have been cold if not for the fatigue behind it. "I want the record to stop lying." The sentence landed harder than Grace wanted it to. Behind her, Tyler Knox's table had gone quiet enough to listen badly. Grace felt their attention pulling at the back of her neck. She turned her head slightly, not enough to address them, just enough to make Drew Maddox look away. Porter noticed. Somewhere private would be better. Grace looked toward Ray. He was already reaching for the coffee pot, pretending not to listen while listening with his whole body. "My break is over," Grace said. Ray pointed toward the back hallway with his chin. "Your break just restarted." Grace looked at him. "You cannot restart a break. I own the clock. That is not how labor law works. It is how my bar works." Porter watched the exchange without comment. Grace took a breath, then led them toward the back hall. Calder followed last. He paused at the threshold and looked at Tyler's table until Tyler lowered his eyes. The hallway felt smaller with 3 people in it. The kitchen noise pressed through the wall. Someone laughed near the fryers. A dish cart rolled over uneven tile. The fluorescent light gave everyone the same pale, tired face. Grace stood near the storage shelf. Porter placed her leather bag on a stack of paper towel boxes, but did not open it yet. Calder leaned against the opposite wall, arms folded, bourbon left behind at the bar. Porter began without ceremony. Operation Nightglass was reviewed because the casualty movement record did not match the extracted medical tags. Grace said nothing. Porter continued. "The original after-action report filed by Commander Blake Whitmore states that the primary corridor remained viable until 8 minutes after your team diverted. That statement is false. The hallway changed, not in any visible way. The light still hummed, the kitchen still clattered, rain still tapped somewhere beyond brick and glass. But Grace felt the old building around her again. The service corridor, the broken wall, the way the air had shifted before the ceiling came down. Porter watched her face and adjusted her voice, not softer, just slower. "We have structural data from the recovery survey. Fragmentary, but enough. We have 2 radio logs that Whitmore's office marked as corrupted. They were not corrupted. They were partially overwritten. We have casualty tag locations that place 3 patients in the secondary passage before the report says anyone entered it." Grace stared at the staff schedule pinned to the wall. Ray had written Grace Close Friday in blue ink. A normal word. Close. She wondered if normal words ever knew how much weight they carried. Porter opened her bag and removed a thin folder. No classified markings on the outside. That meant nothing. People who worked around secrets learned how to dress danger in plain paper. She handed Grace a single page. Grace did not want to take it. She took it. The page contained a timeline, names redacted in black blocks, times listed in exact minutes, columns for location, medical status, route designation, and source confidence. Grace's eyes found the line before her mind admitted it was looking. Subject C. Unnamed medical support. Unscheduled deviation. Secondary corridor entry. Time uncertain. Below it, a corrected note. Subject identified as Grace Ann Callahan. Route change initiated after direct structural assessment. Action preserved viable evacuation path for 4 casualties. Grace read it once, then again. There was no music, no swell, no cinematic mercy. Just the black text saying her name where the old file had refused to. Calder watched her with his jaw set. Porter waited. Grace lowered the page. 4 casualties, she said. Yes. Names? Porter hesitated. Grace looked up. Do not give me black boxes in a hallway after telling me the record wants to stop lying. Porter accepted that. Evan Ross. Daniel Mercer, no relation to the officer. Aaron Velez. Captain Samuel Briggs. Grace closed her eyes at the last name. Briggs had been conscious. That was the first thing that came back. Conscious and apologizing for bleeding on her sleeve, as if there were manners for dying. She had told him to save his apology for whoever had to clean the transport. He had tried to laugh and coughed red into his mask. He made it? Grace asked. Porter's voice changed by half a shade. He lived 6 years after Night Glass. He died last winter. Cancer. Not related. Grace opened her eyes. 6 years. A whole impossible country of time. She had carried Briggs as dead in the private ledger of that night, another name folded into smoke and concrete because no one had ever told her otherwise. Porter saw the impact and did not insult it with comfort. Grace handed the page back. Whitmore knew the primary corridor was gone. Porter looked at Calder before answering. We believe he knew his report was false when he filed it. Believe. The file has standards. Grace gave a small, bitter breath. So did that building. Porter absorbed the line. Then she opened the folder again. There are 19 material inaccuracies in Whitmore's report. 6 relate to casualty movement. 4 relate directly to your role. 3 appear deliberate based on comparison with source documents in his possession at the time. Calder spoke for the first time. Elaine. Porter did not look at him. She should hear it plainly. I agree. I do not agree with burying her under it in a storage hallway. Grace looked between them. Do not manage me. Both of them went quiet. Grace folded her arms. If you came here because you need something from me, say it. If you came here to hand me a medal shaped like an apology, Ray has a drawer full of bottle openers that weigh about the same. Porter's eyes held hers. We need your testimony. There it was. Clean. Hard. Predictable. Grace looked down at the floor. The tile grout was dark from years of kitchen traffic. Her shoes were wet at the edges from walking between tables. Somewhere beyond the door, a customer called for another beer. You have Evan, she said. Porter's expression shifted. Grace caught it. He is alive, Grace said. Not a question. Porter nodded. Calder's mouth tightened as if the news still had weight even after weeks of carrying it. He is alive, Porter said. Calder found him 3 weeks ago in Montana. Grace looked at Calder. You did not say that. I was getting there. No, you were circling. Calder took the correction without defense. Grace turned back to Porter. How is he? Porter did not pretend to know more than she did. Functional, wary, angry in a controlled way. He gave 6 hours of testimony. Grace let that settle. Evan Ross, alive in Montana, carrying the same corridor under a different sky. Her chest tightened, then released in a way that hurt. Porter continued. His testimony is valuable. Yours is different. Because I made the route call. Yes. Because Whitmore called it unauthorized. Yes. Because if I say the primary corridor was not viable, his report stops being an interpretation and becomes a lie. Porter held her gaze. Yes. The hallway filled with the word. Grace stepped away from the wall and walked 2 paces toward the back door, then stopped. She wanted air. She did not want to give them the sight of her needing it. Memory did not arrive as a scene. It came as impacts. A blue light flashing through dust, her left hand slick inside a glove. Radio static so dense it sounded like insects. Evan yelling, "Grace, we need a call!" Whitmore's voice on comms 5 minutes earlier insisting the primary route remained open. Grace touching the wall and feeling heat through concrete. The building speaking a language command could not hear from outside. She had not thought I am disobeying. She had thought they will die here. That had been the whole decision. Porter's voice brought her back. You would have counsel. The session would be recorded. Independent monitor present. You can stop at any time. Grace almost smiled. No one stops at any time. Porter did not argue. No, not really. That honesty mattered. Grace turned. What happens to Whitmore? Porter closed the folder. He currently sits on the advisory board of North Star Medical Systems. They hold trauma response contracts with the Navy and 3 federal agencies. His night glass record supported his appointment. If the review concludes as the evidence indicates, he faces formal military censure removal from the board federal contract review and possible referral depending on proof of document manipulation. Possible referral. The Department of Justice does not move because a thing feels obvious. Grace looked at the closed folder and the people above him. Porter was quiet. Calder's eyes sharpened. Grace noticed both. There were people above him, Grace said. There are always people above him, Porter replied. That is not an answer. No, Porter said. It is the boundary of what I can support tonight. Grace studied her. Porter did not look away. That was something. Not enough, but something. A knock came at the hallway door. Ray opened it halfway. He looked at Grace first. You are needed for 1 minute. Grace was already moving. What happened? Your young philosopher is standing again. The tavern air hit her warm and loud. Tyler Knox was near the bar, not shouting this time. That made the scene more dangerous. Loud men in bars were often trying to be witnessed. Quiet men had sometimes moved past that need. Drew stood behind him with one hand half raised as if he had tried and failed to stop him. Tyler's eyes went to Grace, then past her toward the hallway. I need to ask something, he said. Grace stopped between him and the hallway door. No. His face tightened. I am not trying to start anything. Then do not. I apologized. You attempted to. That struck him. He swallowed. I do not even know what I am apologizing for. Grace watched him carefully. The alcohol had drained from his face, leaving embarrassment raw underneath. He was no longer performing for the table. His friends were silent. The room watched without looking directly the way rooms always watched when pride tried to become something else. Tyler lowered his voice. I gave you a hard time because I thought you were pretending to be something. Then he showed the same mark. Then everyone looked at me like I had stepped on a grave. Grace said nothing. His jaw worked. I need to know what it is. No, Grace said. I am not asking for classified details. You are asking because guilt wants a shape. That stopped him. Grace's voice was not unkind. That made it worse. You want to know enough to feel forgiven for not knowing. I cannot give you that. Tyler looked at the floor. The tavern seemed to lean closer. Grace continued. What I can tell you is this. Some marks are not decoration. Some are not pride. Some are how survivors recognize the cost of a night the rest of the world gets to misunderstand. Tyler looked up. The sentence reached him. Not fully. Enough. I am sorry, he said, this time quieter. Grace held his eyes. Then remember this feeling before you make someone prove their pain for your entertainment. Tyler nodded once. He turned back toward his table. Drew touched his shoulder. Tyler did not shake him off. Grace returned to the hallway. Porter had not moved. Calder stood with his arms folded, face unreadable. Grace looked at Porter. When do you need an answer? Soon. That is not a date. Monday. Grace checked the clock above the kitchen door. Friday night had become something else without asking permission. You will have one Monday. Porter nodded. She reached into her bag and removed another card different from the first. Handwritten number on the back. My direct line. Not the office. Me. Grace took it. Porter's fingers remained on the card for one beat. Whitmore has attorneys. They will challenge memory. They will challenge motive. They will challenge the chain of custody on any document that hurts him. Grace pulled the card free. Of course they will. They may try to reach you. Calder looked sharply at Porter. Elaine. She needs to know. Grace slipped the card into her apron beside Calder's envelope. If they do, I will listen carefully. Porter studied her face. I believe that. The conversation ended not because everything had been said, but because the tavern pulled Grace back by the sleeve of the life she had built. She returned to the floor. She refilled glasses. She cleared plates. She brought Booth 3 their check and smiled when the woman slipped her number onto the man's receipt with hands that trembled from hope instead of fear. The ordinary world kept proving itself shamelessly alive. Calder and Porter sat at the bar in low conversation. Ray served them without asking questions, though questions moved through his face every time Grace passed. Tyler's table paid and left quietly. Tyler paused at the door, looked back once, then stepped into the rain with his shoulders lower than when he had entered. By 10:45, the harbor light thinned into late-night softness. The dinner crowd was gone. Chairs scraped less often. Conversations lowered. The rain slowed to a fine mist against the windows. Ray began closing one side of the bar while Grace wiped down tables. Her phone rang in her apron pocket. Unknown number. She let it ring once, twice. The area code was Montana. Her hand went still around the cleaning cloth. On the third ring, she answered. Callahan. A breath moved through the line. Then a man's voice roughened by years and distance. You still answer like the walls are listening. Grace turned away from the room. For a second, the tavern lost shape. Evan, she said. Yeah, he answered. It's me. Grace walked toward the back hallway, one hand closing around Porter's card and Calder's envelope through the fabric of her apron. Behind her, Ray looked up but did not call out. Grace pushed through the hallway door and stood beneath the humming fluorescent light. The line crackled softly. Neither of them spoke. There were 8 years inside the silence. Finally, Evan said, Calder found you. Grace leaned one palm against the wall. He walked into my bar. That sounds like him. He said you testified. I did. How was it? Evan was quiet for a long moment. Not clean. Grace closed her eyes. No. Not healing either. People keep reaching for that word like it is sitting on a shelf. What was it? His breath shifted. Accurate. Grace opened her eyes. The word moved through her, slowly finding places inside her that had been named wrong for too long. Evan continued. Open the envelope. Grace pulled it from her apron. The seal broke under her thumb with a soft tear that felt too loud. Inside was a folded document on heavy paper and a smaller card. She unfolded the document. Her eyes moved over the header, the classification block, the corrected citation language, the date, the names. Her name. Evans. 3 others. Her grip tightened until the paper bent. They put us back, she said. Some of us. Grace read the line twice. For decisive medical judgment under structural collapse conditions preserving evacuation viability and preventing further loss of life. The words were clinical, insufficient, late. They were also there. Evan's voice came softer. They got the corridor right, Grace. She looked up at the water-stained ceiling. For a moment she saw dust falling instead. They got the corridor right, he repeated. Grace folded the document with hands that had finally begun to tremble. On the other side of the hallway door, the Harbor Light Tavern moved around without her. Glasses clinked. Ray laughed at something a customer said. Rain tapped the rear exit in a fading rhythm. Grace pressed the folded citation against her chest once briefly before sliding it back into the envelope. What did you tell them? She asked. Evan exhaled. Everything I could carry without breaking the table, Evan said. Grace stood in the narrow hallway behind the Harbor Light Tavern, one palm against the wall, the corrected citation folded inside its envelope against her ribs. The fluorescent light hummed above her. The kitchen heat pressed through the door behind her. Somewhere out front, Ray was laughing at something in that rough, tired way he used near closing time when the crowd had thinned and the night had stopped pretending to be young. Grace listened to Evan breathe on the other end of the line. It was a strange thing hearing him alive. For 8 years, Evan Ross had existed in her mind as a possibility she did not let herself touch. Alive was too dangerous. Dead was too final. So she had placed him somewhere between the two in that gray storage room where classified grief went when no one gave it a name. Now his voice was in her ear. Older, rougher, real. What did they ask you? She said. The corridor first. Grace closed her eyes. Of course. They always start with architecture when they are afraid of intent. Evan gave a small breath that was almost a laugh. You still make terrible jokes when you do not want to feel something. I make accurate jokes. Sure. The faint warmth between them lasted 1 second. Then the old knight returned and stood in the hallway with her. Evan's voice lowered. They asked what I saw before you changed the route. They asked if the primary corridor was still viable. They asked who made the call. They asked if Whitmore countermanded it. Grace opened her eyes. Did he? You know he did? I know what I heard. They asked what I heard too. Grace pressed her thumb into the edge of the envelope until the paper bit her skin. Evan continued. I told them Whitmore was not in the structure. I told them he was operating from an incomplete picture and pretending it was command authority. I told them you had 3 patients who could not wait for a man outside the blast zone to understand what the wall was telling you. The hallway seemed to tilt under Grace's boots, not enough to make her move, enough to remind her the body remembered things even when the mind chose not to. I did not choose the secondary because I wanted to be right, she said. I know. I chose it because Briggs was losing pressure, Velez had airway compromise, and the heat was coming through the left support wall. The primary was gone before it looked gone. I know, Evan said again. Grace hated the gentleness in it. She also needed it more than she wanted to. On the other side of the door, someone knocked twice. Ray. Grace did not answer. Ray did not open the door. That was one of the reasons she trusted him. Evan spoke again. They have the old med tags. Not all of them, but enough. They have the recovery survey. They have audio fragments Whitmore marked corrupted. He always was neat with words. He was neat with blame. Grace stared at the old staff schedule on the wall. Her own name was written in blue marker for the closing shift. Grace, close Friday. A smaller life written in a hand that expected nothing from her except clean tables and balanced receipts. "What do they need from me?" she asked. Evan did not answer quickly. That told her more than if he had. "They need you to say it in your own voice." Grace swallowed. "They have your voice. Mine can be folded into his chain of command. Yours cannot. Because I was attached medical. Because you were outside his authority and still inside the event. That makes you harder to contain." Grace let her head rest against the wall. "His lawyers will say I had a motive. They will say you wanted to justify an unauthorized action. I did not need justification." "No," Evan said. "You needed a working corridor." The words landed so plainly that for a moment she could smell the dust again. Concrete powder, burned insulation, blood under gloves, the sour fear of men trying not to die loudly. Grace opened the envelope again and looked at the citation. The words were official, careful, corrected late. Her name sat in the middle of the page like a witness finally allowed into court. For decisive medical judgment under structural collapse conditions. She read the phrase without speaking it. Evan heard the silence. "You opened it?" "Yes." "They got the line about the rote?" "Yes." "And the names?" "Yes." He was quiet. Grace folded the document again. "The 3 posthumous names," she said. "I know. Did their families get anything Porter said there are processes?" Grace almost laughed, but the sound did not make it out of her throat. "Processes?" "Yeah. The military word for grief in a hallway with locked doors." This time, Evan did not answer. 8 years moved between them. Not empty years, not even silent years. Years full of jobs, bad sleep weather bills, small rooms, locked boxes, names unspoken because saying them without permission felt like betrayal, and not saying them felt worse. Finally, Evan said, "Grace." She knew from his tone that he was about to ask, "Do not." "I have to." "No, you do not. I already gave mine. That means Whitmore's attorneys know there is another survivor who can close the gap." Grace looked toward the hallway door. Ray's shadow moved under it and then disappeared. He was giving her space while staying near enough to hear if space turned into trouble. "They know my name now," she said. They probably knew before tonight. Grace looked down at the card Porter had given her tucked beside the citation. "Porter said they might try to reach me." Evan's voice sharpened. "If they do not meet them alone." Grace almost smiled. "You think I need that warning? I think all of us need obvious things said out loud when old files start moving." That was fair. Grace slid the citation back into the apron pocket. "How is Montana cold? It is winter." Then accurate. The warmth returned for another second, fragile and strange. "Do you have people there?" Grace asked. "I have a dog." You said that like it answers the question. It does for now. "What is her name, Sergeant?" Grace closed her eyes again, and this time the breath that left her almost sounded human. "Of course it is. She outranks me in the house. She probably outranked you immediately. She knew it before I did." Another small silence. This one was easier. Then Evan said, "If you testify, it will not give the years back." "I know. It will not make anyone suddenly understand what it cost. I know that too. It might make the lie stop using your name without permission." Grace looked at the door. The tavern kept moving beyond it. Ordinary noise, ordinary needs. People wanting another drink, another ride home, another chance not to say the thing they came in carrying. "I have to finish closing," she said. Evan accepted the retreat. Call me after you speak to Porter. I have not decided. Yes, you have. You just have not told yourself yet. Grace looked at the phone. Good night, Ross. Good night, Callahan. She ended the call and stood still for one more breath. Then she pushed open the hallway door and stepped back into the harbor light. Ray was wiping the far end of the bar. His eyes lifted to her face, then dropped to the apron pocket where the envelope rested. He did not ask about it. Not directly. You all right? He said. No. Ray nodded as if that was the first answer all night he could trust. Can you work? Yes. Then work. Grace picked up a tray. The order of that helped. Glasses in racks, bottles capped, tables cleared, napkins tossed, receipts counted, chairs turned upside down on tabletops with their legs in the air like dead insects. The ordinary labor of closing gave her hands instructions her mind did not have to invent. Ray locked the front door at 11:38. The last customer had been the retired chief who finished his beer in silence and left a folded 10 under the glass. The jukebox was off now. Without music, the tavern sounded older. Refrigerators humming, pipes settling, rainwater dripping from the awning outside. Grace wiped the last section of bar. Ray worked beside her without filling the air. That was another kindness. When the silence had settled fully, he said, The Admiral. Grace kept wiping. Yes. The woman with the government card. Yes. The phone call. Yes. Ray wrung out his towel in the sink. You in trouble? Grace stopped moving. The question was plain, not frightened, not curious in the cheap way. A practical question from a man who needed to know whether trouble was coming through his door wearing boots. I do not know yet, she said. Ray nodded. Is the bar in trouble? No. You sure? Grace looked at him. Not from me. That is not what I asked. She understood the difference. Something tightened behind her eyes and settled there. No. The bar is not in trouble. Ray watched her for a long moment. You need time off. Not tonight. That was not the question either. Grace set the towel down. I may need 2 days. You have them. I have not asked. You are bad at it. She looked at him then, and for the first time all night the corner of her mouth moved. Ray saw it and looked away quickly as if a smile from Grace after a night like this was something private. They finished closing at 11:56. Grace went to the back hallway and untied her apron. The envelope felt too visible, even hidden. Porter's card was beside it. She took both out and placed them in the inside pocket of her coat. The paper rested against her chest, flatter than a weapon heavier than one. She turned off the hallway light and stepped through the rear door. The alley behind the harbor light was narrow and slick with rain. One security lamp buzzed above the back entrance, throwing a cone of pale light that ended before the dumpsters. Beyond them, the alley opened toward the small staff lot where Grace's car waited, backed into the same space she always used. She had taken 6 steps when she stopped. A man stood near the mouth of the alley. Not hiding, waiting. That made the assessment cleaner. Male, mid-50s, medium build, gray overcoat. Dress shoes not meant for wet pavement. Right hand visible, left hand visible. No obvious weapon. Hair cut short enough to suggest either military history or expensive imitation. Shoulders relaxed in the rehearsed manner of someone trying not to look like pressure. Grace shifted her weight evenly. The man took 1 step forward into the edge of the light. Ms. Callahan. Grace did not confirm her name. He held up both hands slightly. My name is Martin Hale. I represent Commander Blake Whitmore. The alley seemed to narrow around the name. Grace's right hand remained loose at her side. Her left hand hung near the seam of her coat, close to the pocket where the envelope rested. Hale noticed the hand. He was trained enough or briefed enough not to look down twice. "I am not here to threaten you," he said. Grace looked at him for a long second. That sentence usually arrives wearing a threat's shoes. Hale's mouth moved in something too controlled to be a smile. "I understand how this might appear." "No," Grace said. "You understand how you want it to appear." Rainwater dripped from the fire escape above them. Somewhere beyond the alley, a car passed on the wet street with a soft hiss. Hale lowered his hands slowly. "Commander Whitmore is aware that a review process is underway. He believes certain parties are interpreting an extremely complex operational situation through an incomplete framework." Grace said nothing. Hale continued. "He is open to a direct conversation, professional to professional, before this becomes adversarial in ways that may be costly to everyone involved." There it was. Costly. Everyone involved. Soft words arranged around a hard center. Grace tilted her head slightly. "You flew here tonight?" Hale paused. "Only half a second." "Enough." "Yes. From where Washington? To stand in an alley behind a tavern in Norfolk. I was already in the region." "No, you were not." The first real flicker crossed his face. Grace watched it and filed it. Hale adjusted. "I am here because direct communication can prevent unnecessary escalation. Commander Whitmore sent you because he is scared." Hale's eyes cooled. Commander Whitmore has no reason to fear an accurate record. Grace felt something inside her go very still. The word accurate did not belong in his mouth. Then he should stop sending men into alleys. Hale reached slowly into his coat. Grace's eyes went to his hand. He froze. "Business card," he said. Slow. He moved with deliberate care, removing a white card between two fingers. He extended it without stepping closer. Grace crossed the distance on her terms, took the card, and moved back into the stronger light. The printed side read, "Martin P. Hale, Harmon Cross and Vale, Counsel and Strategic Advisory." A Washington address. A direct number. The sort of card designed to look clean because the work behind it was not. "Tell Whitmore I received his message," Grace said. Hale studied her. He would prefer cooperation. No. He would prefer control. Cooperation is what people call control when they need it to sound civilized. The rain grew harder for a moment, pattering against the metal dumpster lids. Hale put his hands in his coat pockets, then seemed to think better of it and let them hang at his sides. There are reputations attached to night glass, careers, institutions, families. Grace's eyes did not move. There were patients attached to night glass. Haley said nothing. "That is the part men like Whitmore always misplace first." Hale's face hardened. "Not much. Enough to show her the polished surface had limits. You should consider counsel before making any formal statement." "I will." "Good." Grace slipped the card into her coat pocket. "Are we done?" Hale gave a small nod. "For tonight." Grace let that phrase sit between them. Then he turned and walked out of the alley without looking back. He did not look back because he had practiced not looking back. Grace remained under the security lamp until his footsteps disappeared into the sound of rain. She waited another 12 seconds. Then she took the card from her pocket and looked at it again. The printed side told her very little. The back told her more. Written in small, careful handwriting was a name, Brigadier General Caroline Vance. Grace stared at it. For a moment the alley disappeared. Vance, not Whitmore, not Hale. Caroline Vance had been 2 levels above Whitmore during night class. She had signed the mission architecture, approved the risk matrix, established the corridor assumptions that Whitmore later treated as gospel even after the building proved him wrong. Vance had not been in the corridor, but her name had been in every room that decided what the corridor was supposed to be. Grace turned the card over again, then back. The handwritten ink looked fresh. Not accidental. Not a reminder. A signal. If Whitmore's attorney wanted her to see Vance's name, then one of two things was true. Either he was warning her that the cover above Whitmore was larger than she understood, or he was trying to make sure she knew who else could be damaged if she spoke. Both meant the same thing in practical terms. The file was still alive. Grace walked to her car. She did not rush. She checked the lot before entering it. She checked the rear seat before opening the front door. She sat inside with the engine off and watched the mirrors until the rain blurred the alley into silver lines. Then she drove home. Norfolk at midnight looked washed and empty. Streetlights trembled on wet pavement. The harbor cranes stood beyond the rooftops like dark skeletal things against the low clouds. Grace kept both hands on the wheel and no music on the radio. The road to her apartment took 12 minutes. She made it in 11 because there was no traffic, and because her body had moved into a state where every light, every parked car, every pedestrian under an awning entered her mind as data. Her apartment was on the second floor above an old pharmacy that now sold candles, postcards, and overpriced soap to people who liked old neighborhoods after they had been made safe enough. Grace climbed the rear stairs, checked the landing, unlocked the door, locked it behind her, then stood in the dark without turning on the light. She listened. Refrigerator hum, radiator tick, rain at the windows. No second breathing, no floor shift, no movement that did not belong. Only then did she switch on the small lamp beside the couch. The apartment was spare because spare was easier to leave. One couch, one table, 2 chairs, a narrow bookshelf, a framed print Ray had given her because he said her walls looked like a witness protection office. She had hung it because it made him stop complaining. Grace removed the envelope Porter's card and Hale's card from her coat. She placed them on the kitchen table. 3 rectangles of paper. Recognition, access, pressure. She stood over them for almost a full minute. Then she called Porter. The phone rang 4 times. Porter. The woman sounded awake. Not recently awakened. Awake. "It is Callahan. Are you safe?" The question came too fast. Grace looked toward the dark window. "I am in my apartment. That is not what I asked." Grace respected the distinction. "For the moment, yes." "What happened?" "Martin Hale approached me in the alley behind the tavern. He said he represents Whitmore." Silence. Then the sound of movement on Porter's end. A chair, maybe. Paper. Say his name again. Martin Hale. Harmon Cross and Vale. Porter exhaled through her nose. "That is Whitmore's firm." He offered a direct conversation before the process becomes adversarial. Exact words. "Close. I will write them down. You need to do that before sleep." "I know." Porter's voice sharpened. "Did he threaten you?" "Not in a way a lawyer would invoice as a threat." "Grace." "He said the process could become costly to everyone involved." A pause. "Of course he did." There was something else. Porter went very still through the phone. "What?" On the back of his card. Handwritten. Caroline Vance. For several seconds there was only the faint sound of the open line. When Porter spoke again, her voice had changed. It had lost every remaining trace of ordinary fatigue. "Repeat that. Brigadier General Caroline Vance. Handwritten on the back of Hale's card. No other words. No. Do not leave your apartment tonight." Grace looked at the table. "Is that instruction or concern?" "Both." "What is Vance in the file?" "Officially, she is not." Grace stared at the name. Porter continued more carefully. She was excluded from review scope because her role was assessed as administrative oversight, mission architecture, approval chain, not field command. She signed the corridor assumptions. Yes. And the risk matrix. Yes. and Whitmore's report protected those assumptions. Porter did not answer immediately. Grace heard the answer anyway. Finally, Porter said, "I need to make calls." Porter: "Yes." If her name is outside the review and Whitmore's people are using it, either they know your scope or they know what you missed. Porter was silent. "That is my concern," she said. The line ended. Grace put the phone down. She made coffee she did not want. The machine clicked and hissed in the small kitchen, filling the apartment with a domestic smell that did not belong beside words like review scope and field command. She took the mug to the table and sat. Then she began writing. Time of contact: approximate 11:59 p.m. Location: rear alley behind the Harbor Light Tavern, Norfolk, Virginia. Weather: light rain, wet pavement, security lamp active. Subject: Martin P. Hale. Male, mid-50s, medium build, gray overcoat, hands visible throughout initial contact. She wrote every word she could reconstruct, not impressions first, sequence first. He said he was not there to threaten her. She noted that. He said Whitmore believed parties were interpreting a complex operational situation through an incomplete framework. She wrote that too. He said direct conversation, professional to professional, before adversarial. Costly to everyone involved. She wrote the words carefully, leaving space between them like evidence bags on a table. At 12:41, Porter called back. Grace answered on the first ring. Vance accessed the Night Glass archive 4 times in the last 14 months, Porter said without greeting. 3 accesses occurred after the review opened. Grace set down the pen. Administrative standing: yes. Her original role gave her access rights. The requests did not flag because on paper she had a legitimate historical connection. On paper, Grace repeated. There is more. The 4th request was joint access. The 2nd requester is masked under a confidentiality flag, but the terminal identifier links to a contractor network used by North Star Medical Systems. Whitmore's contractor. Grace did not need to say it. Porter continued. That does not prove Whitmore personally accessed the file. It proves someone within that network participated in archive retrieval with Vance, and Hale had Vance's name on a card within hours of Calder finding me. Yes. Grace looked at the 3 papers on the table. Recognition, access, pressure. Then he knows more about your evidence than he should. That is likely. And he is moving because he is not comfortable. That is also likely. Grace picked up the pen again. What do you need from me tonight? Finish your statement. Photograph Hale's card both sides and send it to this number. Do not contact Hale. Do not answer unknown numbers unless you are prepared to record the call. Tomorrow morning, we will discuss testimony timing. Grace looked at the corrected citation. When is the board session 16 days? And if Whitmore's side raises archive contamination before you do, Porter did not soften it. They will try to make the clean evidence look dirty and the dirty report look misunderstood. Grace nodded once, though Porter could not see it. Then we do not give them the first clean sentence. Grace: I know what I said. Porter was quiet for a moment. Are you giving me an answer? Grace looked at the lantern mark on her wrist. For most of the night, it had felt like something exposed. Now it looked like something returned. Yes, she said. Porter's voice lowered. Say it plainly. Grace looked at the citation with her name printed in official ink after 8 years of absence. I will testify. The apartment seemed to grow quieter around the words. Porter took one breath. All right. I will begin the secure scheduling process. When? As soon as I can make it happen. No, Grace said. When do you need me? Porter paused. Tomorrow afternoon for preliminary counsel and statement authentication. Arlington after that. Grace wrote it down. No flourish, no hesitation. Send the address. I will. Grace ended the call and sat with the pen still in her hand. Outside, rain moved softly against the window. Inside, the coffee cooled, untouched. She looked at Hale's card one more time, then at Vance's name on the back. The ink was small and controlled. A name written like a door someone wanted her to fear opening. Grace took a photograph of both sides and sent them to Porter. Then she folded her alley statement, placed it beside the citation, and finally opened the small card that had been tucked behind the official document inside Calder's envelope. It was not formal. It was handwritten. 5 names: Evan Ross, Grace Callahan, Daniel Mercer, Aaron Velez, Samuel Briggs. Below them, one line: Carry the living. Grace read it until the letters blurred. Then she set it down carefully, went to the sink, and washed her hands. There was no blood on them. There had not been for 8 years, but for the first time in a long while, clean did not feel like absence. At 2:19 in the morning, Grace turned off the kitchen lamp and walked to the bedroom. She did not sleep well. She did not expect to. At 7:10, she called Ray. He answered with a voice full of gravel and irritation. Somebody better be dead. No. Then somebody better be on fire. I need 2 days off. Ray was quiet. Then his voice changed. You got them. I may need more. You got that too. Ray. No. Listen to me once without arguing. The bar survived before you. It will survive after you. Poorly, but it will. Grace sat on the edge of the bed. I am coming back. Ray exhaled. I know. You do know. But I figured if I said it with confidence, you might try not to make me a liar. Grace looked toward the window. Morning had turned Norfolk gray and wet, the city washed clean without feeling clean. Thank you, she said. Ray cleared his throat. Bring back my apron. It is your main concern. It is my favorite apron. You told me last week it was ugly. It is ugly in a way I understand. Grace almost smiled. After the call, she dressed simply. Dark pants, gray blouse, jacket, hair tied back, no watch over the mark. She stood in front of the mirror by the door and looked at herself. Not waitress, not ghost, not the file's old phrase, attached medical support. She rolled her sleeve once, leaving the lantern mark visible. Then her phone buzzed. A secure message from Porter. Address, time, entry instructions. Grace picked up the envelope, the statement, and Hale's card. She placed them in a folder Ray had once used for liquor invoices. The label still read Winter Bourbon Orders in his blocky handwriting. It seemed ridiculous. It seemed perfect. She locked her apartment door behind her and stepped into the cold morning air. On the street below, the city moved as if nothing had changed. Buses sighed at curbs. A cyclist cursed at a delivery van. A woman in a red coat hurried under an umbrella, coffee held close to her chest. Somewhere beyond the rooftops, the harbor cranes stood over the river like witnesses. Grace walked to her car. She checked the street, the windows, the parked vehicles, the reflections in the pharmacy glass. Habit, training, survival. Then she opened the car door, placed the folder on the passenger seat, and sat behind the wheel. For a moment, she did not start the engine. Her fingers rested on the steering wheel. In the quiet, she heard Evan's voice. Accurate. She heard Calder's voice. There is no version of it where you were a complication. She heard Porter's voice. Say it plainly. Grace started the car. The engine turned over. Grace pulled away from the curb and drove toward the highway north, the lantern mark uncovered on her wrist as dawn spread thin and gray across Norfolk. The city gave way slowly. First came the narrow streets near the harbor, slick with rain and early delivery trucks. Then the wider roads, the concrete ramps, the overhead signs pointing toward Richmond and Washington. Grace kept both hands on the wheel. The folder sat on the passenger seat. Ray's old bourbon label still stuck to the front, absurd and ordinary, and holding the first true pieces of her life that had existed on paper in 8 years. Traffic thickened outside Arlington. People moved around her in their morning urgency, sealed inside cars, sipping coffee, answering calls, touching brakes too late. Grace watched them with the detached focus she used in crowded rooms. Every vehicle had weight, every driver had intent, every lane change was a decision. It was easier to think of traffic that way than to think of where she was going. The Federal Review Office sat behind glass and limestone, the sort of building designed to look calm because too many difficult things happened inside it. No flags out front except the American one. No sign that said truth was waiting upstairs. Just security bollards, tinted windows, and a guard behind a desk who checked Grace's name against a list without looking twice at the mark on her wrist. Dr. Elaine Porter met her inside the second checkpoint. In daylight, Porter looked older and sharper. The lines around her eyes were deeper, the gray in her hair brighter under government lights. She wore the same practical calm from the tavern, but Grace could see the night behind her. Neither of them had slept enough. "You came alone," Porter said. "I drove alone," Grace answered. Porter accepted the correction. "Counsel is waiting. Independent monitor is present. You can review procedure before anything is recorded." Grace looked down the hallway. White walls, closed doors, no windows. The air smelled faintly of disinfectant and old carpet. "Where is Calder Conference Room 3? He should not be in the room. He knows." Grace looked at her. Porter's expression did not change. He asked to wait outside. Grace nodded once. They walked. The room was smaller than Grace expected. A rectangular table, 6 chairs, a digital recorder in the center, water bottles aligned too neatly near a box of tissues nobody mentioned. On one side sat 2 attorneys from the Defense Intelligence Review Board. One was a woman named Marisol Grant with reading glasses and a soft voice that did not soften the questions. The other was a younger man named Peter Lang, careful, pale, and nervous enough to be honest. Beside them sat an independent monitor, a retired judge with silver hair and hands folded over a yellow legal pad. Grace sat opposite them. Porter took a chair near the wall, not across from Grace, not beside the attorneys, close enough to witness, far enough not to crowd the record. Grant turned on the recorder. A small red light appeared. Grace looked at it. For years, the official record had been a room she could not enter. Now the room had a red light and bottled water and a woman with reading glasses asking her to state her name. For the record, Grant said, "Please state your full name." Grace's hands rested flat on the table. Grace Ann Callahan, current occupation server at the Harbor Light Tavern in Norfolk, Virginia. Grant glanced down. Former occupation. Grace looked at the recorder. Forward trauma nurse assigned to a classified medical extraction element. The words entered the room and stayed. Lang looked down at his notes. Porter did not move. Grant said, "We are here to discuss Operation Nightglass Spring of 2019. Do you understand that this session is classified and recorded under Defense Intelligence Review Board authority? Yes. Do you understand you may request a pause? Yes. Do you understand your testimony may be used to correct or challenge prior official records?" Grace looked at the red light. Yes. Grant waited one breath. "Tell us where you entered the structure." The room disappeared by degrees. Not all at once. Grace had spent too many years staying functional to let memory take her whole. It came in layers. The table remained under her palms. The recorder light stayed red, but beneath it another floor returned. Concrete under boots, dust in the air. A blue emergency lamp flickering near a stairwell with no rail. "We entered through the east service access," Grace said. 2 floors below the primary extraction level. The original medical plan placed casualty collection near the North Corridor junction, But that junction was already unstable when we arrived. Grant did not interrupt. Grace continued. There were 7 patients when I reached the junction, 3 ambulatory, 4 non-ambulatory. Captain Briggs was conscious but hypotensive. Aaron Velez had airway compromise from facial trauma and inhalation exposure. Daniel Mercer had a femoral bleed that had been packed but not secured for movement. Evan Ross was mobile and assisting with carry load distribution. Lang wrote quickly. Grace heard the scratch of his pen, and under it another sound. A building groaning. She pressed her fingertips once against the table. Grant noticed, but did not stop her. Commander Whitmore's report states that the primary corridor remained viable at the time of your route change, Grant said. Was that accurate? No. Please explain. Grace looked at the water bottle in front of her. She did not touch it. The primary corridor had visible wall displacement on the left side. There was heat transfer through the support surface. Dust was falling from the upper seam in pulses, not continuously. That matters because pulse shedding means the structure is moving under load. There was also a change in sound from the lower service level. Deep resonance, not blast echo. Movement. Grant looked up from the document. You made that assessment directly. Yes. Where were you standing at the mouth of the primary corridor approximately 8 to 10 feet inside the junction? And Commander Whitmore outside the structure. Did he have line of sight? No. Did he have updated structural data, not from inside? Lang looked up. Did he give an order? Grace's eyes moved to him. Yes. What was the order? To continue primary route movement. Did you comply? No. Lang swallowed. Why not? Grace's voice stayed level. Because the primary corridor was going to fail and the patients would die inside it. The room was quiet. The judge wrote something on his pad. Grant leaned forward slightly. What did you do instead? I redirected movement through the secondary service passage. It was not marked as preferred in the mission plan, but it had lower heat transfer, better load-bearing sound, and an exit point closer to the temporary medical vehicle bay. Did you have authority to make that decision? Grace looked at the recorder. I had patience. Grant did not rescue the silence. Grace let the answer stand. They moved through the sequence, minute by minute. Entry. Assessment. First movement. Loss of radio clarity. Velez's airway. Briggs losing pressure. Mercer's bleed. Evan supporting drag carry. Grace cutting loose part of a collapsed cable bundle because it had snagged the litter strap. A name she had not said aloud in years. Petty Officer Hannah Sloan. Grant asked her to repeat it. Grace did. Hannah Sloan was deceased before secondary movement began. I confirmed absence of pulse at the junction. There was no viable intervention under conditions. The words were clinical because they had to be. Clinical language was a stretcher. It carried things too heavy for bare hands. Grant's voice softened without becoming gentle. Did Commander Whitmore's report include that confirmation? No. What did it say? Grace knew the line. She had seen it in her mind for years without ever seeing the page. It attributed delayed casualty accounting to confusion created by unauthorized medical route deviation. Lang stopped writing for half a second. Grace turned her eyes to him. That sentence is why you are nervous, she said. He looked startled. Grant glanced at him, then back at Grace. Grace continued before either could respond. It should make you nervous. It moved blame from a failed command assumption onto the person who kept the route alive. Porter lowered her gaze. The judge wrote again. Grant placed a photograph on the table and slid it toward Grace. It showed a corridor after collapse. Dust, fractured wall, twisted metal, a red marking half visible on the floor. Grace did not touch it. Do you recognize this location? Yes. Is this the primary corridor? Yes. Is this the corridor? Commander Whitmore's report described as viable 8 minutes after your deviation. Grace looked at the image. The old anger came, but it came clean. Not wild, not wasteful. Yes. Grant placed another image beside it. A narrower passage, lower ceiling pipes, overhead emergency light bracket on the right. And this secondary service passage. Did you move casualties through this passage? Yes. Was that movement the result of equipment malfunction and ambient confusion? Grace almost smiled. No. What was it the result of a medical route decision under collapse conditions? The words were hers now. Not Whitmore's, not the files. Hers. They paused after 2 hours. Grace stepped into the hallway with Porter. Calder stood at the far end near a coffee machine, arms folded, gaze down. When he saw Grace, he straightened but did not approach until she nodded. He came close enough to speak quietly. How are you holding? Grace considered lying out of habit. Accurate, she said. Calder's face changed. The word reached him. Maybe Evan had said it too. Maybe they had all been circling the same wound with different maps. Good, he said. No, Grace answered. Not good. Calder nodded once. No, not good. That was better. The second session was harder. Whitmore's attorney had submitted written challenges in advance. Grace was not facing him directly, but his language entered the room through other mouths. Possible memory distortion, operational stress, non-command medical personnel acting outside authority, retrospective justification, personal motive to reframe responsibility. Grant read the questions because procedure required it. Her jaw tightened at the phrase non-command medical personnel, but she read it anyway. Grace answered each one. No performance, no speeches, just clean strikes. Stress does not make concrete cooler. Authority outside the structure does not change conditions inside it. I did not retrospectively justify the secondary route. I used it. My motive at the time was patient survival. When asked whether she had personal resentment toward Commander Whitmore, Grace paused. The room waited. Yes, she said. Lang looked up. Grant held still. Grace continued. I resent that he filed a report that was false. I resent that his false report changed how the dead were counted and how the living were explained. I resent that his career benefited from a version of Night Glass that removed the people who made his plan survivable. But resentment did not move those patients. I did. The judge looked at her for a long moment, then wrote one sentence on his pad. The testimony lasted 6 hours. When it ended, Grant turned off the recorder. The red light went dark. Grace stared at it longer than she needed to. Porter walked her to the exit. Calder followed a few steps behind. Outside, late afternoon had turned the glass building gold. Traffic moved beyond the security barriers. People crossed the sidewalk holding phones, sandwiches, briefcases, lives that did not know Operation Night Glass had just shifted in a closed room upstairs. Porter stopped beside the curb. You did what we needed, she said. Grace looked at her. No. Porter waited. I did what happened. Porter accepted the correction. Yes, she said. You did. The weeks after that did not move like stories were supposed to move. There was no public headline, no press conference, no dramatic arrest on courthouse steps. Classified truth did not break open like thunder. It moved through sealed channels, signed memos, restricted calls, internal findings, and the quiet ruin of men who had trusted paper to stay obedient. Commander Blake Whitmore was removed from the advisory board of North Star Medical Systems pending review. His Night Glass commendation was suspended. The contractor's trauma response program entered federal audit. The Defense Intelligence Review Board expanded the inquiry to include Brigadier General Caroline Vance's archive access. A referral package began moving toward the Department of Justice. Porter called Grace with updates only when she could say them cleanly. "Whitmore is no longer the ceiling," Porter said one evening. Grace stood in her kitchen, coffee cooling in her hand. "What is he, a doorway?" Grace looked at the lantern mark on her wrist, then opened it carefully. "I intend to." Grace returned to work 3 days after her testimony. Ray did not make a speech. He had the good sense not to put warmth where practical kindness would do. He handed her the ugly apron and pointed toward table 6. "They have been waiting 10 minutes, and the tall one thinks eye contact is a service request." Grace tied the apron. "It usually is." Ray looked at her wrist. The mark was uncovered. He saw it and said nothing. Later, after closing, when the chairs were turned and the refrigerators hummed in the silence, Ray finally asked. "That mark," he said. "You ever going to tell me what it means?" Grace wiped the counter slowly. She could have said classified. She could have said nothing. Instead, she folded the towel and set it beside the sink. "It means I carried people out of a place that said no one was coming out." Ray absorbed that. His face did not change much, but his eyes did. "That enough for me to know?" Grace nodded. "For now." Ray looked down at the bar, then back at her. "Then for now I know enough." 1 week later, Tyler Knox came into the harbor light alone. Grace saw him through the window before he opened the door. No group behind him, no loud smile. Civilian jacket, hands in plain sight. He looked younger without an audience. He sat at the bar. Ray gave him one long look. "You planning to be stupid tonight?" Tyler shook his head. "No, sir." Ray grunted. "Shame. I had a speech ready." Grace approached. "What can I get you?" Tyler looked at her wrist, then away. "Not avoidance. Respect. Coffee." Ray made a sound from the far end of the bar. Grace poured it. Tyler wrapped both hands around the mug. "I started asking questions at work." Grace's eyes narrowed slightly. "About what?" "Not about you." "Good. About how fast I decide I understand a room." Grace set the coffee pot down. That was not what she had expected. Tyler looked into the mug. "I thought confidence was something people owed me back if I walked in with enough of it." Grace said nothing. He gave a short, uncomfortable breath. "I was wrong." Grace leaned one hip against the back counter. "Being wrong quietly is a skill. Learn it." Tyler nodded. "Yes, ma'am. Do not call me ma'am in my bar." "Yes, Grace." Ray looked over. "Do not get familiar either." For the first time, Tyler smiled without trying to win anything. He finished his coffee and left a 20 under the mug. Grace put it in the tip jar. 2 nights later, Calder returned. He came in just before closing when rain had started again and the tavern had softened into its final hour. He hung his coat on the back of a chair and sat at the far end of the bar. Ray poured bourbon without asking. Grace walked over. "You keep arriving with weather," she said. Calder looked toward the window. "I have been accused of worse. By Porter, usually." Grace set a water beside the bourbon. "You drinking or delivering both?" He reached into his coat and placed a small object on the bar. A coin, dark bronze. Heavy. Not polished for display. Made to be carried. Grace did not pick it up at first. On one side was the lantern mark. On the other were 3 lines. Night glass. Spring, 2019. Carry the living. Grace's throat tightened before she could stop it. "How many?" she asked. 5. "Evan received his yesterday." Grace touched the coin with 2 fingers. It was cold. Calder watched her. "This is not official issue. It will not appear in any inventory. Porter hates that I made them." "Does she?" She said unofficial symbols are how official systems avoid responsibility. Grace almost smiled. She is not wrong. No, Calder said. But neither am I. Grace picked up the coin. It settled into her palm with a weight that felt different from paper. Paper corrected. Metal remembered. Calder took a drink, then set the glass down. There is a unit being formed under the review board. Small. Medical operations. Classified casualty records. Cases where after-action reports and human cost do not match. Grace closed her hand around the coin. Porter sent you. Porter asked me not to make it sound like a recruitment pitch. You are failing. I retired before I got good at subtle. That cannot be true. It is not. Grace looked around the harbor light. Ray was counting receipts near the register. The old ship bell hung over the door. Rain slid down the windows. The room smelled of lemon cleaner beer coffee and wood that had absorbed decades of other people's nights. This place had let her become small without asking why. That had saved her for a while. It could not hold all of her anymore. What would I be doing? She asked. Calder's answer was quiet. Reading files for what the file learned to hide. Medical timelines, casualty movement, field decisions that got renamed by people who were not there. Grace looked at the coin. And what would I be? Calder did not dress the answer. Necessary. Grace stood behind the bar for a long moment. Then Ray called from the register. If you are about to steal my best closer, Admiral, you can at least finish your bourbon first. Calder looked over. I would not dream of stealing her. Ray snorted. Men in nice coats always say that before paperwork appears. Grace turned the coin over in her palm. The lantern mark caught the light. She thought of the corridor. Not as a grave this time. As a place where a decision had been made and people had lived because of it. She thought of Evan and his dog in Montana. Porter awake at midnight building a framework out of fragments. Tyler learning how to be wrong. Ray pretending not to care so she would not have to carry his worry too. Grace slipped the coin into her pocket. I will talk to Porter, she said. Calder nodded. That is all she asked. No, Grace said. It is not. Calder looked at her. Grace met his eyes. But it is where I can start. After Calder left, Grace stepped outside before locking the back door. The rain had stopped. Norfolk harbor lights shimmered on black water beyond the street. The air smelled of salt diesel and wet brick. She rolled her sleeve once. The lantern mark rested on her wrist, faded but visible. Not hidden, not displayed. Present. Her phone buzzed. A message from Porter. First file is ready when you are. Grace looked at it for a long moment. Then she looked back through the tavern window where Ray was turning off the last light. She placed one hand in her pocket and closed her fingers around the coin. The metal was warm now.